In this video today, I'm going to show you step by step how I made this fiberglass lid using a template that was shipped to me by a customer. Stay tuned. What's up guys, welcome back to Backyard Boatwork. So in this video I'm going to show you step by step how I use this template that was made out of a kusa that a customer sent to me that he needed to make a fiberglass lid from. So here I'm just using the template that was sent to me, and I traced a rough outline of that template onto this 1/4 inch sheet of MDF. So I cut the template about 1/4 inch bigger than the kusa, and we're going to just screw these two pieces together and then use my router to fine tune the fit. So you see I got a little bit of extra hanging off here, and I'm going to load up my router with a flush trim bit. It's a spiral flush trim bit. Having troubles talking in this video. So here you can see I'm just walking the template around and flushing this MDF piece up to the kusa. Once I have this MDF piece, I really don't need the kusa template anymore, and we're going to work from this wood template. So because this lid or this template is pretty square, this mold's going to be a lot easier than some of the molds that I build. So here I'm using some 3/4 inch MDF, and I'm cutting 2.5 inch strips. Now I screwed the template that we made just a moment ago on the router to this larger piece of MDF, and you can see here that I'm just lining up those 2.5 inch wide pieces to the template that we made. So the corners on this lid are almost square. There's a very, very small radius on this lid, so we're going to make the radius with some modeling clay, and you'll see that later here in the process. So here I'm just screwing down the edges, making sure that all these pieces line up perfectly square with the template, and then securing it to the larger bottom piece. So you're probably wondering why I'm working on the floor here, and it's only because the shop was super full with other projects and I ran out of bench space. Alright, that's it. The mold's done. Video's over. Just kidding. Now we got to prep the mold to make the part. So here I'm using an automotive grade, a 4:1 high build polyester surfacing primer. And I use this because it's a little less expensive than, say, a Duratec primer, and also because it's not catalyzed with MEKP, the pot life on this is a little bit longer. So here in South Florida it's super hot, so the longer the pot life, the better. So I'm going to put about 3 or 4 coats of this high build primer on it, and I'm paying particular attention to put a little bit extra on those edges of the MDF because that's where we cut it with the circular saw, and that's the roughest part of the wood. So here I'm using a 320 grit just to knock down the edges, because you know that rough cut on the side of the MDF needs to be smoothed out. So the next step here is I'm using some modeling clay, and now we're going to build the radius inside the mold. So just take this and spread it out with your finger. Try to get it into the corner as tight as you can, and we'll move all the way around to create the radius. And then I'm going to be using a stainless steel filleting tool. And you can see that here. This tool has a different radius on each side of it, so I'm using the smaller edge. I think it's about a 1/2 inch radius. And you can see I'm just walking the modeling clay out. You can't pull too much at once, because if you do, the tool will just pull the big chunk of it out of the radius, and you don't want that. So just go little by little, pulling the radius tool along the modeling clay, and then you'll end up with a nice clean radius in the corner. So after you're all that, just take a plastic spreader, and having a nice brand new one works good here. So you just walk along where you have the excess that ends up squishing out from behind the radius tool, and you just walk it around super delicate and clean it up, so all you have left is the radius in the corner. So a little trick that I used with this modeling clay is I squirt a little bit of water on it and then walk my finger along the clay, and it tends to just smooth it out, flatten it out, removes any big chunks or any remnants that happen to be in the way. So you can see here that I use that modeling clay to create the radius in the corner. It's pretty square, but there still is a little bit of a radius, and just clean up all that water with paper towel. So the next step is using some part all wax paste number 2. And I don't get crazy with this here. You see a lot of guys that do this and they put on 5, 6, 7, 8 coats, buffing it and all that. If you had a production mold, you probably would want to do that, but this is a one-time mold, and the PVA here, the part all number 10 that we're spraying on the mold, is going to do the majority of the mold release work. So here I'm just loading up my PPS pressure cup gun again with the PVA, and make sure to wear a mask for this. And we're going to turn the gun down really, really low so there's barely any material coming out of it here. Because you don't want to put on too much PVA because it's very liquid and it'll start to pool up in the corners and it'll run. If you get runs or blobs in your PVA, that's going to come out in your final parts, and we want to avoid that. So it's super hot, but I do use a heat gun here just to tack off the first coat. And once that first coat is kind of warm and tacked off, it doesn't have to be fully dry. It holds on really good to the second, third, and fourth coat. So I probably put 3 to 4 light coats of PVA on the mold total. So here I'm just getting dressed up, getting ready to shoot some gel coat. So this is my 3M VersaFlow machine, probably the best money that I've ever spent. So if you're around gel coats, resins, and things like that, I would highly suggest investing in one of these. You can't put a price on your health. So here I'm mixing up some basic white gel coat. This is like the cheapest of the cheap gel coat that you can buy. The reason I use that is because this is a one-time mold, and the chances of this part coming out of the mold perfectly are pretty slim. So I'll just use this cheap gel coat to create the part, and then I'll have to come back and shoot the final part with gel coat again. So here I have a 2.0 millimeter tip on my pressure cup gun, and this video here is played in 100% speed so you can see exactly how slow I'm going. So the gun is completely open all the way, and the pressure is up probably to about 45 or 50 pounds, and just trying to get as much of it down into the corners as possible. If the gel coat is too thin, you'll have issues with alligatoring, which I'll show you that happened in the final part. So you want to make sure you have about 20-25 mil thickness of gel coat, and if you have a mil thickness gauge, that helps out a lot. So if you're using a gun like this with the disposable liner and PPS tips, this is how I clean out my gun. I just have a little spray bottle with acetone in it, and I just spray it through the tip, wash out the front of it, then clean the needle on the gun and spray it out with a little bit of compressed air, and also make sure to clean the needle on the gun because you don't want any material drying on that needle for that gun. Alright, so here comes the meat of the project, and that is doing the lamination. So this gel coat, I let it sit overnight. I found that allowing it to fully cure overnight is probably going to give you the best chances of the resin not attacking the gel coat. As I said earlier, if the gel coat's too thin, the styrenes in the resin will attack the gel coat, and it will make it re-dissolve again, and you don't want that to happen because then you'll get alligatoring. It'll look like alligator skin in your gel coat when you pull the part off. So here I'm using a 3/4 ounce chop strand mat to do the edges, and the reason I use a 3/4 inch chop strand mat on the corners is because it's super fine and you can easily push it into the radius. That first coat is probably the most important part of skinning your mold, and that's going to determine how well your piece looks when it comes out of the mold. So on the flat sections, I use a 1.5 ounce chop strand mat because it's a lot easier to put chop strand mat on flat parts of the mold than it is to put it into the corners. I used to use 1.5 ounce in the corners, and it's just a little too difficult to get it into those radiuses here. So here I'm using a thin roller just to push all of the chop strand into the corners, and you can see here it's a nice clean radius sitting up against that gel coat. So that first skin layer, you want to let it almost fully cure. Obviously you don't want it to 100% cure, but you can let it sit depending on your temperature. I let mine sit for about 30 to 40 minutes, just so that that base skin layer cures enough so that it holds that radius. And as you move on to the subsequent layers of chop strand mat and glass, you don't accidentally pull that skin layer out of the radius, and that's going to give you air pockets in your radius. You want to avoid that. So let that first coat sit for a while, let it get hard enough so it won't move, and now we're going to add the next layers of lamination. So here I'm putting 1.5 ounce chop strand mat into the radius and laying again 1.5 ounce chop strand mat onto the flat sections. So once I had that second coat of 1.5 ounce chop strand, now we're going to move on to putting in the core material. So here I'm going to be using a 3/8 inch honeycomb core, but I need to mix up some thickened polyester so that we can spread this thickened resin under the bottom of the core material, and it'll act as a core bonding compound. So sometimes I buy gallons of core bonding compound already pre-mixed, so all I have to do is scoop it out of the bucket and then, trowel it onto my core material, but I didn't have any available. This works just as good. However, I could not find my notched trowel, which would have been great. I have a 1/2 inch notched trowel, kind of like a ceramic tile trowel, to spread this out evenly. So I kind of had to improvise here. I had a flat spatula and just tried to get it as a consistent thickness on the bottom of the core. On a small part like this was pretty easy. And then we're going to weigh it down with some cinder blocks, and these blocks fit almost perfectly on this lid mold. So you'll want to let this mold sit with the weight on it until the core bonding compound cures enough so that the core won't lift. Again, depends on the temperature that you're working in and how much you catalyzed it with MEKP. So here again, just moving on with some polyester resin, and the next layer of lamination, I used a single layer of 1708. So this is a smaller hatch. So you don't need a ton of lamination. This honeycomb core with a little bit of glass will be very, very, very strong. So here I'm just adding a little bit more 1.5 ounce chop strand mat to the edges so that we can build up that edge and have a nice, a durable leading edge on this lid. So something you want to be careful of at this stage in the process is that you don't want to put too much glass and too much resin on at once, because the exotherm from the polyester resin is going to cause so much heat that it'll actually cause the core material to warp in the mold, and it will pull itself completely out of the mold. You may not even notice it until you go to release the part from the mold, but when you take the lid out, you'll have a lid that's curved, and you don't want to end up with a curved lid. So if you're working in hot temperatures or you're making a lid that needs a lot of lamination, I would pause a little bit between these different layers, give it some time for the exotherm to release the heat, and then proceed to the next layers of lamination. Just try not to generate too much heat all at once. So here my finishing layer on this is going to be another layer of 1.5 ounce chop strand mat, and that just cleans up the bottom of the mold. So once that cured fully, I'm using my oscillating cutting tool here, and I have a grout cutting disc. It's a carbide grout grinding tool, and it works really good for cutting fiberglass. And here's the fun part, always, is lifting the part out of the mold. So it came out pretty good. But I do notice some issues, and you'll see here in a second when I show you. So here, this is just excess gel coat that was on top of the mold. And the green here that I'm sanding off was the PVA. So you can wash the PVA off with water, but this 60 grit on the DA sander will just take it off really, really fast. And then I just finish up the edges by hand. I try to avoid sanding the edges with the machine because it leaves flat spots. So here I'm just using the 60 grit again on the edges just to clean up all the radiuses along the edge. And here you can see the alligatoring that I was talking about, and this was a result of just too thin of gel coat in the corner of the mold. So I'll have to touch this up with some filler, and then like I said, I'm gonna have to shoot this again with white gel coat and then buff and polish it to a nice shiny final part. So that's it. I tried to move through this video as much as I could. There's a lot of content and a lot of details to cover, but it looks like I'm at about 15 minutes. So if you guys have any questions about any of the steps, anything that I missed, which I'm sure that I did, leave a comment. You can reach me on Instagram, and I also created a Facebook group where I'll post this video and you can discuss it there as well. Appreciate it, guys. See you in the next one.